Welcome to the Financial Coaches Podcast, where we talk about how to build your practice from startup to scale up while being the kind of coach your clients crave. Finally, a podcast for financial coaches. Here are your hosts, Maria Casillas and Cody Sizemore.
Hello, and welcome back to the Financial Coaches Podcast. My name is Cody Sizemore, and I'm joined here by my lovely co-host, Maria Casillas. And, we were going to talk about something today, but I changed my mind. I got hit up by somebody literally right before we pressed record. I did not tell Maria anything, so I'm just going to spring it on her, and we're going to have some fun. But before we get into that, I'm going to dangle that carrot in Maria's face so that the anticipation just keeps building and building and building, because I have a few things I want to say first. First of all, if this is your first time listening to this show, thank you so much for checking this out. Hopefully you get some value from this topic today. And if you do and you want to go back and listen to all the other episodes that we've done, you're more than welcome to. Binge us like a new Netflix show that you just found and you just absolutely love. You can't get enough of it. We have seasons upon seasons upon seasons upon seasons of episodes. So there's plenty to binge, And if you do that enough, and you also keep doing that with us every single week as we keep releasing these episodes, you will then become not just a first-time listener, but then also something else that we call the people who do listen every week, which is our every weekers. And we just want to, throw a special shout out to those people, because those people are the ones who really keep this show going, and we just really appreciate your support now, in the past, and of course, moving forward as well. And actually, what's interesting is that this question came from an every weeker, which is great.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then the other thing I want to say too is that, if there is something to where you have a question or you have a suggestion for this show, a topic of something that you want us to discuss, a really great way for you to let us know about that would be in our free Facebook group. So you can simply just you go to facebook.com, you type into that little search bar, and you type in the words, The Financial Coaches Community by New Money Habits. You'll find us, you press the join button, you'll answer a few short questions, and bada boom, bada bing, you're in, and you can answer, and you can ask those questions for us to answer. So with that being said, Maria, how are you feeling? Are you ready for this?
I don't know. All that anticipation has me going, lay it on me. Let's see what we got.
So it came in, and I was like, this is a topic that I personally haven't had like a ton of experience with, at least actively.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm pretty sure that Maria has some sort of background in this,
Okay. Yep.
So I'm just going to read
good stuff I have a background in.
Yeah.
I'm about to find out.
I'm just going to read the question. Is that all right?
Okay. Yep.
Okay. So he said, here's a show topic idea. Tips on coaching a client with addictions. Just for a little bit of context, I have a guy who entered my program, and 4 months in, each month he has slowly climbed from starting at $1,000 positive surplus each month to over now a $4,000 surplus for month 4.
Okay.
Month 5, though, had a negative deficit of $1,000 because of personal substance addictions. It's really hurt his books, but also his ability to work. I'm fully anticipating a great final month with him again, but do you have any tips for this situation or even for future clients as well?
Wow. Well, there's a lot there, and
Yeah,
I
dropped the
think,
bomb on you.
yeah, sure did, and I appreciate that, I guess. I think that the word addictions is probably what made you think that I have a background in that. That would be my guess. So for those of you
Probably.
who are not yet every weekers, maybe you're tuning in for the first time today. I have a master's degree in substance abuse counseling, and that is what I set out to do. My gosh, now 25, 30 years ago, which is just crazy to think. But that is probably where Cody's thinking about that expertise. So um, yeah, there's a lot there. I think there are some unanswered questions slash assumptions that are in there that I'm just gonna probably have to take some liberty with. And so if I'm assuming incorrectly or I got the information wrong, I apologize ahead of time. But the way that that's worded, it sounds like they go from a negative to a positive 1,000 up to 4,000 and then down to negative 1,000. So my guess is that that is probably a combination of in versus out. So maybe this individual has um, like an erratic income. It's
Hmm.
not predictable. Maybe he's working a few different jobs, or maybe he starts a job and then, loses it if he's in active addiction. And I think that's one of the things here. It doesn't really indicate there, Cody. But I will say that when I was helping individuals who are in active addiction, I was not doing money coaching. Okay.
Hmm.
So these are two different times of my life. When I decided to become a money coach, one of the things that I recognized was that so much of the behavior and the thoughts are very, very paralleled to those thoughts and behaviors that tend to be done or taken with people who are in active addiction. And so that was the reason that I started to apply some of that information and that process to my money coaching. But I will say that I've not had somebody who is in entrenched in addiction right now, who is also one of my clients. So I just want to preface all of that
Hmm.
by saying that. Um, One of the other things is it depends on what the addiction is.
Right.
So it could be an actual substance addiction. Did they say that in the question?
Let me pull it back up.
I apologize. I'm trying to remember if it was specifically a substance. And
Yeah,
by that I just
it says personal substance addictions.
okay, so it is substance. Okay. And by substance, it could be anything from alcohol to pot to any of the harder drugs. But I do want people to hear real quickly that substance addiction is one form, but there are others as well. And so chances are you might have somebody who has a lot of these addictive qualities. There's gambling addiction there, which is something that we have seen obviously with somebody who needs money coaching. But there's also um like obsessive compulsive sorts of behaviors that maybe you don't think that that's addictive, but it can be. There's obviously, addiction to things like pornography. There's addiction to uh basically you can be addicted to anything, right? I mean,
Hmm.
that's addictions to food. That's another really, really strong one. So and I guess technically food could be considered substance because it's substantive, but
Yeah.
I don't think that's what he was
Yeah.
talking about. So anyway, all of those things are something to just kind of consider, because the things that are needing to be purchased for feeding this addiction is something that will absolutely affect somebody's budgeting and their cash flow in general.
Yeah. And it also seems like you mentioned, there's multi layers to this, right? Because for someone to start off with, $1,000 surplus, and then them to do enough work to get it up to the $4,000 surplus, which I just had a thought pop into my head, but I'm gonna finish this one first.
Hmm.
Um, to then go into a negative $1,000 again. It's not like he's spending, $5,000 on substances and crap. It's possible that he's
Hmm.
doing that, but he also said that it's affecting his ability to work
Hmm.
as well. So
Hmm.
there's definitely a loss of income and probably an increase in expenses. both
Yeah.
happening at the same time, and that's a really clear thing I just want, or a really important thing I want to make clear. Um, the other thing that popped into my head, and oh, I might be losing it. Hold on. Is uh oh yes. Uh so someone who had an active addiction, which maybe it was active when he first started working with him and he didn't know, or
Mhm.
maybe it's something that he had a relapse with while he
Mhm.
was working with him. I don't know the context.
Mhm.
But I think that this person probably started working with this coach coming from a place to where he was probably struggling financially in certain ways. He maybe was going backwards, maybe he was paycheck to paycheck, whatever it might be. And then he started seeing all this progression. And quite frankly, it was really awesome progression. I mean, if you're talking about having a $4,000 surplus, that's that's a lot of money to have, every single month extra to put
Right.
something towards, right? That may have opened the door for him to potentially go back down that road, because there was more opportunity and there was maybe a little bit less pressure, uh,
Mhm.
to really be dialed in and take care of himself to where he's like, oh, well, things are good now. I can, chill out, or I can go back to this a little bit, won't hurt me. But then that slope is slippery kind of thing. That was just a thought that kind of came into my head. I don't know if there's any merit to that or not, but
There's
I
a
mean,
lot of merit to it. Yeah, 100%. I mean, anybody who has an addiction, they're just humans,
yeah.
and our human behavior is one where if you have a behavior that is incentivized, you're going to get more of that behavior, and if you have one that is punished, you're going to get less of that behavior. There is a thing called natural consequences and natural outcomes, and if we have positive natural consequences or natural outcomes, it's it's really, like you said, going to lessen that desire to make any change. Like, this is going really well. Why would I need to, make any difference? Make do anything different? Yeah, I'm sure you've heard the phrase "hit rock bottom."
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, that's something that, on one hand, very can be very useful. On the other hand, it can be very frustrating because it's like there's an assumption of what rock bottom looks like. So the reason I think it's helpful is because I do believe there's some merit in the idea that until you've hit your lowest, your point of I need to make a change, then you're not going to make a change. There has to be a definitive time when you say, okay, I'm ready. I have to do something different. And I think that's really what people mean when they say rock bottom. The problem with the visual of being rock bottom is that there's an assumption that it looks very similar and not for everybody, that it looks, if nothing else, it might look different, but it's always going to be this dire situation. And that's not true.
Hmm.
It's not true that it has to be a dire situation for person A, although it might be the person B has lost absolutely everything. They've lost their family, they've lost their home, they've lost their car, they've lost everything. But that's person B, and person A might feel enough pain by simply missing their first mortgage payment that has them go, "Oh, crap." Like, I really need to make some changes here, right? And so
Hmm.
I think that's why I don't love that phrase, just because there's this assumption of what that looks like for everybody. So to your point, Cody, if there is this $4,000 surplus, and I'm actually kind of curious if that's what this writer means by surplus, like, is it truly above and beyond what this client's normal cash flow looks like? Is it $4,000 above and beyond that?
That's the way
And if
I'm reading it.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, that's the way I'm hearing it as well. I'm just wondering if that's what is intended. Because if so, like you said, that is a large amount of I got I can do whatever I want with this money, right? Um, if indeed it is, then what you said is absolutely true because there's no pain. There's no pain there. We could spend that on, I mean, although I've not gone out and bought any certain substances lately. So again, depending on what the addiction is, it $5,000, $4,000 could be just a little bit. I don't know, you know? I
Mhm.
I haven't gone out and purchased any hard drugs lately. I know alcohol might be going up because of inflation, but and not to joke about this, but I truly don't know what that is. So that's just one of those relative things, right? So $4,000 worth of alcohol is a lot of alcohol. $4,000 worth of another hard substance might not be that much.
Mhm.
Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
really don't know where this went. But that's not what this person's asking. He's asking, how do we deal with some of this behavior, this mindset? I'm guessing is really what he's asking.
Yeah, and that was kind of the question that was in my head to ask you next, which is like, hey, so we understand what happened. I think that we can understand as much as we can as to maybe why it
Yeah.
happened, given the limited context that we do have. But I think that the next question would be, okay, well, how do we help these clients move forward from something like this? Like
Mhm.
what's the next step? What's the first thing? Whatever it might be. And I think the thought that's going through my head is going back to those stages of change,
Mhm.
right? Which we can get into if you feel like it's valuable, but um you go with whatever direction you feel is best. That's really my question, is like, how do we help people you know rise above this, not just for their financial sake, but
Yeah.
even for just like their own just betterment in general.
Sure. Well, I think that, I mean, the stages of change are great. It's something that, I talk a lot about, especially in the context of readiness for coaching. I would be a little bit careful about, I mean, we can talk about them in the sense of how those are actually developed or discovered, if you will, based on addiction, and so they're definitely relevant. I would just be a little bit careful that our coaches are not trying to dip their toes into the realm of helping the person with the addiction specifically. That's one thing I would just make sure that you're drawing that boundary. That is not your lane unless it's your lane. If it's your lane, then, obviously you can do what you need to do. But if you are, I'm going to use the word just a financial coach, and I don't mean anything bad by that. Um, but if you are simply a financial coach, then I would be very careful as to how much you are addressing the actual addiction. Now, having said that, one of the things that I think is really important is, if you're going to understand the stages of change, it really is just your readiness for any sort of change. So if this person is in the very first stage, which is pre contemplation, chances are they're not really ready to make a change. Now, they could be in pre contemplation for their addiction and in stage 3 for their money, right? So there are different areas of this person's life. And we all experience this. I mean, I will be in a different stage of change when it comes to, working out than I will when it comes to learning something new to teach my kids. There are just all of these different areas that they are technically separate. We're not in one single stage of change at time of our lives. That being said, if this person is not ready to address any of the money stuff, then what you're going to find is a lot of sabotaging going on.
Mm.
And so you might see that on paper it looks really good, and then they're not quite sure how to even be in that place. Like they're not sure how to be in a surplus of $4,000. And so, even at a subconscious level, even if they're not spending it on going out and, buying the specific substance, they could just be squandering that money because they only know how to be in a deficit. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
So, one of the things I think is super important, and this is something that even if you're not in your lane, this is absolutely something you could use. When we're working with specifically just with the addictions, one of the biggest things to consider is accountability. we're our own worst enemies. And so having some accountability built in, that's where like the whole 12-step program, for example, comes into play. The 12 steps themselves can be very powerful, but the most powerful part of that program, the reason that it works so well for so many people, and by the way, I don't think it's the only way that that can work, but it is something that works super well for a lot of people. But I think it's mostly because of that accountability. Like if you think about it, they have a sponsor that they have. That sponsor is basically allowed to call them out on any behavior that they're doing. But it's not just the behavior, it's the thinking. And that's one of the parallels that I saw when we were talking about addictions versus money is it's that our thinking gets ourselves into trouble. It's not just the behavior. Our behavior is driven by the way that we are thinking about something. And so when they have this sponsor, that sponsor is able to help them be accountable to the way that they're thinking and the way that they're feeling and the way that they're behaving. And if we can replicate that a little bit, I think that's one of the things that we can actually do as a coach when it comes to somebody who has an addiction is sort of step in more of as an accountability partner, not in it in not a replacement as a coach, but alongside your
Hmm.
role as a coach,
Yeah.
or have them find somebody else who can be that accountability partner.
Yeah. And that's the thing that's going through my head is like, you know, especially if you're working with someone across the country, like
Hmm.
you can hold people accountable to a certain degree, but having someone in their close circle as well
Hmm.
is going to be really helpful. There's something else that's been kind of swirling around in my head, and I wonder if you what your take is on this. So I've mentioned that like I haven't had a direct experience with working with someone who has an active addiction.
Hmm.
However, I have worked with people who did have addictions
Okay.
and overcame them.
Hmm.
Um, and then, then they have maybe it kind of like took place into their finances instead, kind of thing,
Hmm. Hmm.
And at least in my experience, generally speaking, I have actually really liked working with those people because there's something about them where it's like, well, if you can overcome, you know, a meth addiction, or if you can overcome a cocaine addiction or whatever it might be, right? Um, you can overcome this, you know? Like they have like this like different type of fight in them.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, and that's just my experience. So I've actually really enjoyed working with those people, but I don't know if you find that like a lot of the people who do end up having successful recoveries from that carry that kind of thing that I'm talking about, or if you feel that like, hey, it's actually very kind of circumstantial. And then a follow-up question would be if it is relatively common, I'm sure that there's always exceptions, right? But if it is relatively common, how can we how can we address that part of this and almost like use that as a tool to help them get back on track, Kind of similar to our previous conversation when I was talking about um the client dropping out prematurely.
Hmm.
You know, I use the phrase calling them out on who they are, kind of thing, right? Something like that, like, hey, you've overcame this once before. You can do that again, and you can also do that same thing with your finances too. Calling out who they are, kind of
Hmm.
thing.
Hmm.
Is there anything that's coming up for you there, or no?
Yeah, well, I want to be able to answer your questions. I do also want to say that there's a term for that, and it's self-efficacy. So that basically means that you're able to do something, and that's one of the tools that we use in the stages of change to help somebody grow from one stage to another. And that's it's using motivational interviewing, which I don't want to go too far in the weeds with all of this, but motivational interviewing is basically ways to ask questions that help people to go down that motivation continuum, right? And
Mhm.
so one of the ways to help people with that is to help them see their levels of self-efficacy. You've done this in the past. When was a time that you were successful at X, Y, and Z, and then helping them to apply that to a current situation. So everything that you're saying there absolutely not only has merit, but it actually has been shown to help people by anchoring a past success and being able to use that for future success, and even if it's in a different type of scenario, as long as there are parallels there. Um, I will say to your first question, you had asked, about have I seen it where people who have overcome one addiction, then it has affected their finances. I want to ask you this. Are you saying that their their behavior in the addiction had this rippling effect on their finances? Or are you saying that they overcame this addiction and now we're seeing similar thoughts and beliefs and behaviors, but they're no longer surrounded around meth, for your example, but now we're seeing those in the way that they interact with their money, in the way that they spend?
Probably the latter. Yeah,
The
because
latter. Okay.
there is, at least I've heard, um, just through day-to-day life, right?
Hmm.
Like, if someone has, like, some sort of addiction to something, and it could be something hard, it could be something soft, like, it doesn't have to be like a direct, like, substance, like, any form of addiction,
Yeah.
food addiction, whatever, anything,
Yeah.
really.
Hmm.
But
Addiction to drama, which
yeah,
I see a lot these
exactly,
days.
exactly.
Yep.
But oftentimes, what I've seen and what I've heard is that when sometimes people overcome one thing, that same behavior just gets transferred to a different area
Yep.
in the thing?
Yep. And that's I was wondering which of those two things. Because if somebody has truly, I think you had said, did you say that they were overcame that addiction?
Yeah,
Um,
I guess, yeah, you could say that.
so my slight pushback to that is they might not have overcome that addiction. They might have replaced that addiction with another one that
Right.
is a little bit more acceptable by society, for
Sure.
example. Or
Yep.
maybe it doesn't hurt their family. The consequences aren't as dire relative to the way that they would have been with that other thing. And so that is one of the key elements here. We see, even though I mentioned the 12-step program, it's what's interesting is you might have somebody who's in that program and like 95% of the people in that program are also smokers, right? And it's because they have clinched their jaw and replaced one addiction with another one that is a little bit more acceptable, it's a little bit less consequential, etc. And that isn't really overcoming. That's not really addressing the heart of what is going on. And so unless some of those underlying thoughts and underlying beliefs are really started to be addressed, then it will carry on through every area of that person's life in one way or another. It will not always look as dire. It won't always seem to have those really strong consequences, but it will still show up. And I say this as somebody who has a very addictive personality. I come from a long line of addicts and I have a very addictive personality myself. It's oftentimes why I intentionally don't put myself into a position where I could lose control, because I know that it's something that I could be very susceptible to.
Mhm.
Um, so some of that is not addressing the problem. Some of that is just avoiding the not the circumstance. That's not what I'm looking for, but avoiding the scenario where I know I can be very vulnerable in. Having said that, while I keep myself safe, I also have looked at what are some of the beliefs that are coming, and why are they there? How rational are they? And can we start to replace those irrational beliefs with more rational ones? And that is basically what we call CBT. So if somebody's looking for therapy, and I know that this individual wasn't asking about therapy, but I'm just going to tell you CBT stands for cognitive behavioral therapy. So if you just do without the therapy and go CBA, I don't know, the cognitive behavioral approach, we'll just make our own acronym today. But that's really what that is recognizing what are some of the underlying beliefs. How does that then lead to our behaviors? And what are the consequences from that? And so we know that when we do something and we say, hey, why did you do that? We can usually point to two things, Cody. We can point to the activating event, so the thing that happened right before we made our decision, right? And we
Mhm.
can usually point to how we were feeling about it. Like there's usually, it might not be a very accurate, concise emotion that we're able to identify. Oftentimes we say like we were angry. And I always encourage people, if you're going to use the word anger, let's dig a little deeper and see what is the underlying actual emotion there. And it's not that anger can't be considered an emotion. It's just that usually it's the socially accepted response, but maybe we're not really angry. Maybe we're actually hurt. Maybe we're embarrassed. Do you see where I'm going with that? So just kind of figuring out what you're actually feeling. But we can usually identify what happened prior, and then we can identify the feeling. What we tend to not really be able to see and identify readily is the underlying thought or belief that is sort of causing or resulting in the way that we're feeling about something. And that's important because that's how we can actually change outcomes is by shifting that belief. And once we're able to shift that belief, then we typically will have a different emotional outcome and then a different behavioral response.
Hmm. The question is going through my head, which this might be too much to get into. So you tell me if it is. Might be a different episode.
Okay.
Um, how can we help people shift those beliefs? Because I think it's easier said than done.
Oh,
You know.
100%.
Um,
Yeah, if it was super, super easy, there wouldn't be
yeah,
CBTs out there.
yeah.
The therapist wouldn't exist. There would be no need for them. It's a really great question, and it's not one that we have to go into in a whole different way. The short answer for that really is identifying the rationality of that belief. So, sometimes you can go into where did it come from and, all of that. That's only it's really only important, I think, if it's if the basis from where it came is fueling all of your thoughts. If there was some sort of trauma in your background and that had and let's say it happened at age 3, and because of the formidable years, that's when it was happening, it sort of defined who you are as a person, and now it's feeding every belief in all of the different areas. In that sense, I do believe it's, yes, very important to figure out where did that come from and help that person to work through that trauma. Now, again, that is not our lane, and so we're not the ones who do that, but if you recognize, oh, this person went through this particularly traumatic event and it is clearly affecting all of the areas of their life, including the way that they handle their money, now that would be grounds for a referral onto somebody else who really knows what they're doing. But if it's something that, you are recognizing as a patterned belief, but it's only in a certain area, you don't need to dig into their childhood to find out where it came from. You
Yeah.
could, it might be fun, but it might create trauma for them. So maybe don't do that. Just ask, you can start to measure the rationality of that belief. So for example, um, a very common belief around money is rich people are evil. Now, we could talk all day about, well, maybe half a day, about where that belief starts to stem from, but we don't even have to. We can just tackle the belief on its face and ask the person on a scale of 1 to 7, 1 to 6, what is the rationality of that? How logical is that? And what what sorts of things out there prove that to be true, and what sorts of things out there say that that's not true? Walk through that process a little bit. You might hear a story that from their childhood that says, "Oh, that's where that came from." You might kind of hear that. But just ask, who do you know that's rich, and tell me about them. And they
Right.
might share something about how that person's super evil and blah blah blah, and then you can bring up, well, this good thing over here happened. What do you know about that good thing? And you know that it happened by somebody who has a lot of money. There's some philanthropist or something, and then it kind of starts to I can't find the right word right now. But there's a real word, and since you threw this out at me, I don't have it in front of me. But it basically disputes that belief,
Right.
and maybe that is the right word. I don't know. But it's disputing that belief because now they're seeing, oh, there's this thing over here that doesn't fall with. And the more that they can do that, more you can help them dispute that belief, then the more likely it is that it will start to shift for them. Why is that important? Because if they believe that rich people are evil and they themselves do not want to be intrinsically evil, then they will, even if it's at a subconscious level, they will start to avoid wealth. They will start to push it away. Somebody like who we're talking about today, if that's their belief, and I don't know that it is, but if it is, then even if they have a $4,000 surplus, like, oh, that's a lot of money. I could be rich someday. They're not consciously thinking this, but I could be rich someday. Rich people are evil. I'm not evil. And therefore, we're going to squander that money. And it seems like it could be a stretch because I literally laid out the different thoughts that people have. But again, these happen very quickly and oftentimes without them even recognizing it. And so it seems irrational, but this is actually the way that it works. So when
Yeah.
they squander their money and they go, I have no idea what happened. I can't even explain it. And I didn't go out and I didn't spend it on, my substance of choice. I actually just went to, wherever, or I just gave it all away. That's another thing. It doesn't even have to be bad. And I'm using air quotes for those of you who are just listening. It doesn't even have to be bad behavior. Like maybe they go out and give a $4,000 gift to a local charity. Okay. So no one would question that, right? Well, of course, they're being nice. But are they doing it for the sake of doing it, or are they doing it because deep down they're not quite sure how to handle a surplus of $4,000?
Yeah.
So,
It's a good point. Awesome. Well, thank you for uh all the just really, really good information. And allow me to ask
yeah,
questions that
that I'm not
maybe
prepared
could
for.
have gone down the rabbit hole a little bit. But yeah, I mean the person who submitted this, hopefully this is helpful for, your current client, for future clients if this ever comes up. And again, hopefully, this is just valuable for anyone who's listening.
Yeah,
Whether you have someone that you're actively working with that has this kind of situation, but I also think that it's just good to know for future reference because, you know, at some point I'm sure this might come across someone's plate. You know what I mean?
I'm
So,
sure. And to the original asker of the question,
mhm,
if this didn't answer the question, because I know it's hard sometimes to answer a specific question without some of that specific information, you do have permission to reach out and ask. I'd be happy to sit with you with that a little bit.
absolutely. Yep. Awesome. Well, hey guys, thank you again for listening to another episode of the Financial Coaches Podcast. Be sure to check out the new one that's coming out next week as well. So we'll see you then. Take care.
Thank you for listening to the Financial Coaches Podcast, brought to you by New Money Habits and Sizemore Financial Coaching. Submit your questions to our hosts by emailing podcast@newmoneyhabits.com. Be sure to subscribe to be notified of future episodes and join our growing group of like-minded coaches on Facebook. And until next time, happy coaching.